I never imagined I'd be the girl who leaves a groom at the altar. No one does. From the outside, everything looked perfect. The ring, the venue, the guest list, the man. But sometimes, the perfect picture hides a story no one sees coming. 2 weeks before my wedding, I started crying in my sleep. At first, I thought it was just stress. Wedding planning is supposed to be overwhelming, right? Between final dress fittings, catering tastings, and managing a family that seemed more excited than I was, the pressure was building fast. But the tears didn't stop. And worse, I couldn't explain why I wasn't happy. Cold feet, my maid of honor Casey said with a shrug, handing me a mimosa as we sat on my balcony in downtown Charlotte. Every bride gets it. Maybe she was right. Or maybe I was already trying to silence the voice inside me. The first time I felt the doubt, it was a Tuesday evening. We were choosing flowers. Zach, my fiancé, barely looked up from his phone. "Whatever you want, babe," he mumbled, scrolling through his stock alerts. I paused, staring at him. "What do you want, Zach?" I asked. He didn't even lift his head. "I want you to be happy. Isn't that enough?" It sounded sweet. Kind. But there was something hollow in it, like he wasn't part of us anymore. Just watching me live out the fantasy, checking off boxes I wasn't sure I even wanted checked. Later that night, I stared at myself in the mirror, toothbrush in hand, watching the girl with the ring on her finger, asking silently, "Why don't you feel excited?" The second wave hit during our joint bridal shower. Zach was late. Not a little late, an hour and a half. He strolled in like he'd just come from a beach, unbothered and unapologetic. "I had a meeting," he said, kissing my cheek while everyone clapped and took pictures. I smiled. I always smiled. That's what a bride does. But deep inside, I flinched. That night, when we got back to his apartment, I asked him if everything was okay between us. He blinked at me. "Of course. Why would you even ask that?" I opened my mouth to explain, but my heart was already folding in on itself. I said nothing, because if I said it out loud, it might become real. 1 week before the wedding, I had lunch with my mom. We sat across from each other at a cozy brunch spot, and she looked at me with the same wide-eyed joy she wore when she found her wedding dress 40 years ago. "I can't believe you're getting married," she said, tearing up. "You've always been the dreamer, the one who wanted the fairy tale, and now you've got it." I smiled again, like I always did, but under the table, my hands were shaking. "I guess I never really knew what the fairy tale would feel like," I whispered. Mom didn't hear me. She was already gushing about grandbabies. 3 days before the wedding, I went for a walk alone. No phone. No planner. No bridesmaids. I ended up at a park we used to go to when Zach and I first started dating. I sat on the same bench where he once brought me coffee and told me he loved me for the first time. It felt like someone else's memory. I closed my eyes and tried to replay the moment, but the warmth was gone. All I saw was a version of me clinging to something fading. And it hit me. I was in love with who he used to be, not who he was now. And maybe, just maybe, I was in love with the idea of him. That night, I cried again. This time harder. Because I realized I didn't want to marry a man who didn't ask me how I was feeling. Who thought showing up late with a kiss was the same thing as showing up emotionally. And worse, I didn't know how to tell anyone. The night before the wedding, my phone didn't stop ringing. Vendors. Bridesmaids. Aunt Lisa, who flew in from Atlanta. I answered every call, smiled through every conversation, laughed at every joke. But my heart was drowning. Around midnight, I pulled my journal out and wrote one sentence in shaky pen. If I walk away, will I survive? Then I asked the harder question. If I stay, will I lose myself? The morning of my wedding, the sun rose bright and golden, as if mocking me. I looked like a magazine bride, flawless white gown, hair in soft curls, veil cascading down my back. But my hands? Cold. So cold I could barely grip the bouquet. The makeup artist gushed. The photographer snapped away. Casey held my hand. "You ready?" I nodded. But my knees locked in place. As the music started and my father took my arm, I took one shaky step. Then another. The church was filled with people, but all I could hear was my heartbeat. Zach stood at the altar, smiling, but I couldn't move. In that moment, standing at the beginning of what was supposed to be forever, I realized I couldn't do it. Not because I didn't care, but because I couldn't sacrifice me to make everyone else happy. I let go of my father's arm. "I'm sorry," I whispered, stepping back. Gasps echoed through the room. My mother clutched her pearls. Zach's smile fell. "I can't do this," I said louder, voice trembling, eyes on Zach. "I love who we were, but I don't know who we are anymore." And then, I turned around and walked out of the church. Outside, the air hit me like freedom. I didn't know what came next, but I knew this. Sometimes, choosing yourself is the bravest vow you'll ever make. Silence. That was the first thing I heard when the heavy church doors slammed behind me. No music. No gasps. No voices. Just silence. It was as if the world paused for a moment to let me breathe. I stood outside the chapel, still in my wedding gown, bouquet trembling in my hand, eyes burning with unshed tears. The midday sun was warm on my skin, but I couldn't stop shaking. I had just done the unthinkable. I had walked out on my own wedding day. A limo driver stared at me from across the street, unsure whether to open the door or not. Pedestrians slowed, eyes darting between me and the church behind me. But I couldn't move. Not yet. The magnitude of what I had just done weighed on my chest like 1,000 bricks. A minute ago, I was about to commit to forever. Now, I was standing alone in a white dress, at the doorstep of the biggest scandal my family had ever known. The door opened behind me. "Emily." It was Casey, heels clacking, veil in hand. Her voice cracked like she was out of breath. I turned slowly. "What are you doing?" she whispered urgently. "Everyone's inside. Zach's waiting." My lips parted, but the words didn't come. Not everyone would understand. Casey stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Look, I know it's scary, but this is a lot. Are you really sure you want to do this?" I met her eyes. Yes. That one word fell like a stone between us. Her shoulders dropped. She looked down at my trembling hands. Then she did something I'll never forget. She nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "Then let's get out of here." We didn't go far. Casey and I ended up in a quiet coffee shop 5 blocks from the church, me still in my wedding dress, a hoodie thrown over my shoulders to hide the laced corset, and the beating that now felt like armor from another life. People stared. Some smiled awkwardly. One woman whispered something to her friend and glanced at me like I was a runaway bride from a soap opera. Maybe I was. The barista brought us 2 cappuccinos and a brownie on the house. Pity brownie, probably. I stared into the foam of my drink like it held the answers. Casey reached across the table and gently touched my hand. "Talk to me. What happened?" I took a deep breath. "I don't know when it started," I said softly. "Maybe months ago. Maybe a year. But somewhere along the line, I stopped feeling seen." She nodded slowly. "You mean by Zach?" "Yes. He used to listen, care, laugh. But lately, everything felt rushed. Like we were checking off a to-do list. Like I was the only one holding it all together." I looked away, blinking back tears. I thought maybe I was being dramatic. Or afraid of commitment. But this morning, standing at the end of that aisle, I felt like I was walking into someone else's life. Not mine. I stayed at Casey's apartment that night. She helped me out of the dress, hung it carefully in her closet, and handed me a glass of wine. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. But as I lay on her couch, staring at the ceiling, my phone began to buzz. Calls. Messages. Missed notifications. I ignored them all. Except one. Zach. I deserve an explanation. The next morning, my mother showed up at Casey's door. She didn't say a word at first. Just looked at me. Her face wasn't angry. Just devastated. "Emily," she began, her voice quiet and trembling. "Do you know what you've done?" I nodded. "Yes." Her eyes welled with tears. "You embarrassed us. Everyone was there. What am I supposed to tell people?" My hands clenched the throw pillow in my lap. Tell them the truth. That I couldn't marry a man I wasn't happy with. She flinched. You waited until the wedding day? Couldn't you have figured this out before hundreds of people flew across the country to watch you disappear? I wasn't trying to hurt anyone, I whispered. I didn't want to hurt myself anymore either. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then she said something that shattered me. You've always been selfish, Emily. She turned and walked away. I spent the next few days dodging phone calls, avoiding social media, and sitting in parks just to feel the wind on my face. The world moved on. But mine had been flipped upside down. Zach didn't reach out again after that one message. I heard through a friend that he canceled the honeymoon, took a few days off work, and moved back into his condo. But I couldn't stop thinking about him. Not because I wanted him back, but because I needed to mourn who we were. A week after the wedding, I met him. He asked to talk. We sat on a bench at Freedom Park, neutral ground. He looked thinner, tired. You humiliated me, he said softly. I swallowed hard. I know. And I'm sorry for the way it happened. But it would have been worse if I lied my way through a marriage just to keep up appearances. He nodded bitterly. You blindsided me. I tried to talk to you. So many times. You never asked me how I was feeling. You just assumed I was happy because things were moving forward. He looked down. I thought you were. So did I whispered. We sat in silence. Then he said something I didn't expect. I wish you had told me sooner. I nodded. Me too. And just like that, we said goodbye. Not with anger. Not with hate. But with a strange, heavy respect. Walking away from a wedding isn't the end of a love story. It's the beginning of finding your own. That's what I learned. The world tells us to stay, to compromise, to smile and go along with what's expected. But no one teaches us the power of listening to our gut, even when it tells us to walk away from everything we've built. This wasn't just about Zach. It was about me reclaiming my voice. They say after the storm comes the calm. But no one tells you what to do when the silence feels heavier than the chaos ever did. It had been 10 days since I walked out of my wedding. 10 days since I stood in front of hundreds of people and chose myself. 10 days of waking up to silence. No more morning texts from Zach. No wedding thank you notes to write. No honeymoon to pack for. Just me. And the questions. Endless questions. Did I make the right choice? Will anyone ever trust me again? Who am I now if not someone's fiancé, someone's almost wife? On the morning of day 11, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at the girl I no longer recognized. My hair was messy. My eyes were tired. I hadn't put on makeup in over a week, and my phone still buzzed occasionally with missed calls and half-hearted "Are you okay?" texts from people who wanted gossip more than truth. But the girl staring back at me wasn't broken. She was breathing. And that was enough for now. I picked up my journal. Today, I start over. I moved back into my old apartment. It still smelled like lavender and lemon just the way I left it. Familiar. Safe. A little lonely. I opened the windows and let the light flood in. Then I boxed up all the wedding magazines, the framed engagement photos, the cards that said "Future Mrs. Carter." Each item went into the bin with a mix of sadness and relief. I didn't throw them away out of anger. I did it to clear space. Physical space. Emotional space. Because healing needs room to grow. The first real sign of healing came unexpectedly. A call from my old boss, Lydia. I heard what happened, she said gently. I know it's none of my business, but you were always one of my favorite interns. Would you consider coming back part-time? I blinked. You're serious? Dead serious. We need someone to manage our summer events. And if there's anyone I trust to keep calm under pressure, it's the woman who just walked out of her own wedding with grace. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. Okay, I said. I'll do it. Work became therapy. I poured myself into planning events for Lydia's nonprofit, galas, community dinners, small networking events. It felt good to be needed again. To feel like I had something to offer that wasn't wrapped in lace or gold bands. People stopped whispering when I walked into rooms. The stares softened. And eventually, I stopped hearing the runaway bride behind my back. Instead, I started hearing something new. She's strong. She's brave. She did what most people couldn't. One Friday evening, while setting up for a charity dinner, a woman approached me. She looked to be in her early 40s, elegant but tired. "Are you Emily?" she asked. I nodded. She smiled. "I watched you walk out of that church." I was sitting in the third row. My heart clenched. I braced for judgment, but her eyes softened. "I wish I had your courage 20 years ago." I stared at her. She touched her wedding ring absent-mindedly. "I married a man I wasn't in love with because I didn't want to disappoint my parents. 2 kids and a quiet divorce later, I'm still learning how to choose myself." I didn't know what to say, so I hugged her, not because I pitied her, but because I saw myself in her. And maybe she saw a future version of herself in me. That night, I stood in my kitchen barefoot, sipping wine and scrolling through old photos. I paused on one of me and Zach from 2 years ago. We were on a boat, laughing so hard our faces were scrunched. I studied that girl. Her smile. The way she leaned into him, like the whole world made sense. "I miss her," I whispered. Not because I wanted Zach back, but because I missed me. The me who laughed without worry. The me who believed in love without fear. The me who didn't second-guess her heart. So, I made a plan. Not a 5-year life plan. Not a checklist. Just a promise. Every morning, I'd do one thing that reminded me who I was before the doubts, the pressure, the heartbreak. One morning, I went for a run through the park where I used to journal. Another day, I visited the used bookstore on Main Street and bought 3 novels by female authors. Then I signed up for a solo pottery class. And then a dance class. And then I started baking again, burned the first batch of cookies, but who cared? Little by little I was rebuilding her. The girl in the mirror. 2 months after the wedding, I got a letter. No return address. Just my name. It was from Zach. Inside was a single page. "Emily, I don't hate you. I understand now." I wasn't listening. I was too focused on having a perfect life that I didn't see you slipping away. "I hope you find everything you were brave enough to walk toward. Zach." I sat on my couch, reading it over and over, letting the words sink in. He didn't ask for me back. He didn't blame me. He just let go. And in doing so, gave me the final piece of closure I didn't know I needed. 3 months in, the nightmares stopped. The guilt stopped gnawing. My reflection didn't scare me anymore. I could look in the mirror and smile. Not because I had it all figured out, but because I was finally living a life that felt like mine. Healing doesn't come with a calendar. There's no announcement when the ache begins to fade, no grand moment when the heart whispers, "I'm ready again." It just happens. Quietly. Softly. One breath, one step, one smile at a time. For months had passed since I walked away. I no longer cried when I passed the bridal section of the department store. I no longer felt shame when someone asked, "Didn't you almost get married?" Now I could say, yes, with a steady voice and a stronger heart. But love? I had tucked that word into a drawer somewhere, far away from reach. At least, until I met someone who didn't try to pry it open, just sat next to it and waited. His name was Adrien, and I met him on a Thursday afternoon at the local library. I was there to pick up a book for a community event. He was there to return a stack of mystery novels. We reached for the same door. He opened it first. "After you," he said with a small smile. I thanked him, nodded politely, and went inside. That should have been it. But fate, in its quiet persistence, had other plans. 30 minutes later, I was in the biography section when I heard a soft voice behind me. "Are you a fan of Maya Angelou, or just pretending to be intellectual like I am?" I turned, startled, and laughed. There he was, holding a copy of I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, and wearing a sheepish grin. "I actually am a fan," I replied, raising an eyebrow. "But nice save." He smiled wider. "I'm Adrien. Emily." We ended up talking for almost an hour, sitting at a small table near the windows. Books turned into music. Music turned into life. And life turned into shared stories, mostly light ones. I didn't tell him about the wedding.
Not yet.
This moment was about possibility, not past pain. Over the next few weeks, we ran into each other again and again. At the bookstore, at a local cafe, once even at the farmer's market. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe the universe was nudging me, whispering, it's okay to feel again. Eventually, Adrien asked if I'd like to go for a walk. Just a walk. We strolled through Freedom Park, sipping iced tea, talking about everything from childhood dreams to favorite foods. He was gentle, curious, present.
He didn't talk over me.
Didn't rush to impress. He listened, and I realized how rare that felt. One evening, as we sat on a bench watching the sun melt into the skyline, Adrien turned to me. I feel like there's a story behind your eyes, he said quietly. One you're still figuring out how to tell. I froze. He didn't push. Didn't ask questions. Just looked at me the way no one had in a long time, with patience. So I told him. Everything.
From the planning to the panic.
From the aisle to the exit. From the guilt to the growth. I expected him to look shocked. Maybe even uncomfortable. Instead, he just nodded. You chose truth, he said. That takes guts. I swallowed hard. Most people don't see it that way. I'm not most people. And I believed him. It wasn't love at first sight. It was respect at first conversation. Comfort at first silence. Peace at first touch. Adrien didn't try to rescue me. He met me where I was. And somehow that was exactly what I needed. One night, months after we met, we sat in my kitchen cooking dinner together. He was chopping onions, and I was trying to read the recipe aloud without laughing at his overly dramatic tears. You know, he said suddenly, you smile differently now. I looked up. How do you mean? Back when I first met you, your smile looked careful, like it came with rules. But now, it's real. It reaches your eyes. I didn't say anything right away, but in my heart, I knew he was right, because for the first time in a long time, I felt safe. Falling for Adrien wasn't like falling at all. It was more like rising, like rediscovering warmth after a long winter. He never asked for parts of me I wasn't ready to give. He waited. He listened. And he reminded me every single day that love is supposed to feel like home, not a performance. But here's the thing about healing. It doesn't mean the past disappears. It means it no longer controls you. I had walked out of my wedding because I didn't want to lose myself. Now, I was walking into something new because I finally knew who I was. It was a rainy Sunday afternoon when everything came full circle. I was curled up on the couch, a soft blanket around my shoulders, a cup of chamomile tea in hand, and Adrien's head resting in my lap as he quietly read a book. Outside, the rain fell steady against the windows, a rhythmic tap that reminded me of everything I'd survived to get here. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I didn't feel like I had to be anywhere else, or anyone else. I was home. Looking back, people still ask me, would you do it all over again? Would you still walk out, even with all the shame, the mess? My answer has never changed.
Yes.
Without hesitation. Because what I gained from walking away far outweighed what I lost. I lost a wedding, but I gained my freedom. I lost a relationship, but I gained my identity. I lost the life I had planned, but I discovered the life I was meant to live. A few weeks after Adrien and I made things official, I got a message request on Facebook. It was from Zach's mom. At first, I didn't open it. I let it sit there for 2 days, my heart unsure of what it wanted. But curiosity won. Her message was short, simple,
Kind.
Hi Emily. I just wanted to say that I hope you're doing well. I know things didn't go the way any of us imagined, but I admire your courage. You followed your heart, and that takes strength. Be well. I stared at that message for a long time, and then I cried. Not because it hurt, but because it healed. It was the last piece of forgiveness I didn't realize I needed. One afternoon, I stood in front of the same church I walked out of nearly a year ago. This time, there was no white dress, no bouquet, no crowd, just me. I had driven past it on my way to meet a friend and felt the strange pull to stop, park, and walk up those familiar steps. I stood at the entrance, hand resting on the door handle I once pushed open with trembling fingers and a heart full of fear. I whispered something only the walls could hear. Thank you. Not for the pain, but for the clarity. Because if I hadn't walked out, I never would have walked into me. The journey back to myself wasn't perfect. There were days I questioned everything. Nights I lay awake wondering if I'd ever feel whole. Moments I feared that maybe, just maybe, I had thrown away something good enough in the hope of something better. But good enough was never the life I wanted. I wanted joy. I wanted truth. I wanted a love that felt like freedom, not pressure. And that started with loving myself. Adrien once told me, love shouldn't feel like a job interview. You shouldn't feel like you have to prove your worth every day just to stay chosen. That line stuck with me, because that's how I had spent years in my previous relationship, constantly striving, constantly shrinking, constantly trying to be the version of me that fit someone else's mold. But with Adrien, I could just be
Messy. Honest. Whole.
And even if it hadn't been him, even if I had remained single for years afterward, the lesson would still stand. I deserve a life that feels like mine. 1 year later, on the same date I was supposed to get married, Adrien and I went on a road trip. No destination. No itinerary. Just the open road, a playlist full of soul music, and two people learning to build something without rushing the blueprint. Somewhere between Virginia and Tennessee, we stopped at a small diner off the highway. There was a chalkboard wall where customers could write little notes, quotes, or messages for future visitors. I borrowed a piece of white chalk, thought for a moment, and scribbled my words. Sometimes walking away is the most sacred step toward yourself. Adrien smiled as he read it. Then he wrote underneath. And sometimes, what you find on the other side is everything you didn't know you deserved. We stood there for a while, holding hands in silence. Not rushing, not planning, just existing. Together. If there's one thing I hope my story gives you, it's this. Permission. Permission to listen to your gut. Permission to say no, even when everyone expects you to say yes. Permission to choose your peace over people's approval. Permission to start over at the altar in your 20s, 30s, or 60s. There is no right time to choose you.
There is only now.
Walking out of that wedding wasn't the end of my love story. It was the beginning of the most important one of all, the one I wrote with myself. And because of that, I can say this clearly and confidently now. It was the best decision I ever made.